they come in. So first and foremost, I want to say a huge thank you to everyone joining us. And we have a couple of little housekeeping things. If we could just play by these rules, I think it'll go really smoothly. First, if we could just, because I know we all kind of came here to listen to Cristina talk. So if we could all mute our microphones, and the bottom left of your screen, there should be a little microphone sign that if you just click that, then that'll help us hear all the amazing things Cristina has to say. And another thing is we are going to be recording. I don't think that it shows the other participants' videos, but if you guys don't want to be recorded, just make sure to close your video. If you don't mind, then you can have your little smiling face in there. We love to see that. But we will have these recordings available on our YouTube channel, both Cristina's and mine. So if you have friends and family who wanted to join and couldn't because of timing, we'll definitely be sending that link out to everybody soon. And then the last kind of little housekeeping thing is basically the fact that we have a chat function. And if you guys could go ahead and look at that chat function and type in any questions you might have during the talk today, that'll be super amazing, because we absolutely want to make sure that you guys get your questions asked, and we'll be monitoring that. And then at the end, we'll be able to answer some of those questions if we've got some time left over. So make sure you utilize that chat function. Keep your microphones on mute, and everybody hopefully is doing really, really well. I know it's stressful times, so thank you again for joining us today. Really quickly, for some context for you guys, my name is Hannah, and I am the president and lead scientist at the American Shark Conservancy. I've been pretty lucky to be really good friends with Cristina Zenato for quite a few years. Lucky happenstance, ended up in the Bahamas, and luckily we've maintained a friendship for a while, and I think we complement each other pretty well. I have a scientific background, and my organization is primarily science-based. So we have research projects going on here in South Florida. And then basically we have some outreach and education opportunities too. And basically I wanted to say that my interest, and I think my admiration for Cristina has always been the fact that she's a true explorer. And in my mind, that is the trait of a scientist. So whether or not you have a scientific degree or have done academic scientific training, basically I think that's where our spirits are quite the same, because we're always asking questions, and I formulate those into scientific questions. Cristina is a naturalist, an explorer. She asks the questions and is always learning. So I think that's where we managed to get along pretty well. So just if Cristina, you want to take a second to introduce yourself,
okay.
That would be great. And like I said, if we could just make sure everybody's muted, we can definitely hear Cristina and my share.
I think we still have one with microphone open.
Okay. All right. I'll scan that.
Hi, Hannah, and everyone. Thank you for having me. For those who don't know me, my name is Cristina Zenato. I've been living for the last 26 years on the island of Grand Bahama. I came here as a much younger version of myself to learn how to scuba dive. And then I ended up staying, following a passion that I had for the sharks that I first discovered, and then cave diving, which came in the end. Through the years, I grew my professional levels. So like Hannah said, I am not a scientist, but I am one of those people that goes in sometimes for the scientists. I spend quite a lot of time on the water, both with the sharks or in the caves. And I go into reaches where maybe scientists don't go, either because of lack of qualifications or lack of time or a different kind of duties. And that's where we complement each other very much. On a daily basis, I'm still working with sharks. I'm still working in cave diving, research, collecting data, especially now after Hurricane Dorian. We've been very much concentrating on the water table on the island and the consequences between the water table of the island and the mangroves, the sharks, the entire fauna, the entire marine ecosystem. So something very, very interesting. I founded a People of the Water in January 2019. and he's a non-profit. We're two members at the time, and he's primarily an outreach into education and help us into furthering the exploration of what our goals are, to then collect data, to then be able to provide this data to people that create legislations, protections, environmental rules for specifically the island of Grand Bahama, in general for the Bahamas, and then to lead as an example for other locations in the world.
Oh, is that all? Yeah, so again, like I said, I think the main takeaway from this today, I'd like everybody to have, whatever your background is there's a couple of different concepts out there when it comes to science. And like I said, I come from my scientific, background, my training. That's where that's where I invested like my interests. But I think for a long time, science has sort of sat in maybe a little bit of a bubble. And in the past, they've swooped into areas, collected a lot of information, and sort of swooped out. And that's an old school way of thinking. And I think there's a few concepts that we, as sort of the newer generation of scientists, like to employ when we're thinking about our projects. And I think of Cristina and her sharks a lot of the times when we're developing these things. And basically, the big thing is the idea and the concept of community or citizen science. You don't have to have 4 to whatever 12, 18 years it feels like of training in academia to help contribute. So I see that Cristina's outreach and teaching all through the years has definitely been kind of training these community scientists and these citizen scientists. So that's something I think we can take away from the scientific community. We can take away from the interactions that we have with people like Cristina. And the other concept as well is something we call local ecological knowledge. So we like to complicate things in science. It's basically, let's talk to the people who are actually there in the area that we want to study. Lots of times that has been used in like fish markets and dealing with fishermen and fishers and anglers. They're the ones that come into contact. And now we're starting to form projects where we really talk to divers, because they are the local ecological knowledge. Divers spend a ton of time in the water that I wish I could spend, but they do. And there's this kind of hive knowledge that we're trying to tap into. And the third concept, really quickly, I'll stop with the boring science stuff, but the third concept as well is participatory approach. And another fancy word, basically, if you come into an area and you want to study something, like I want to know more about Cristina's Caribbean reef sharks, and we come into an area and I want to engage her, the communities, the industries, basically if you include them in your project design and you include them in the science and communicate with them, there's going to be, first of all, your science is going to be way better. And secondly, you are going to know a lot more than you would know if you just swooped in. And thirdly, once that information comes out in these goofy scientific papers that are really long and complicated, I'm going to have such a great relationship with that group that I'm going to be able to communicate the results to them, and they're going to buy into the results. And those results for our organization are very much driven by what's going to make policies better for sharks. So although science has been in a bubble, I think it's just really important to know that there's a lot of people working on including all of our amazing explorers like Cristina in our projects moving forward. So I'm going to go ahead and start asking, firing off some questions to Cristina about her area as a scientist, things that I'm interested in. So hopefully you guys will learn a little bit more about it as well. So you've kind of explained where you live and work. Can you explain your actual work with sharks? Like, what does your day look like?
So it depends on the day. I have a very variety of jobs that I do during the day. I know a lot of people, I receive a lot of comments about, oh, I want to come and work with you with sharks. What they sometimes people don't realize is that, yes, I work with sharks, but then I also have, dry jobs, and I have background jobs, and I have the cave diving jobs, and I try to put all of these together. So my days are very different from one day to the other. Currently, due to COVID, we're not allowed to boat for pleasure. So I haven't been able to go out with the sharks specifically. Thanks to a permit that I have through the police and the Bahama National Trust, I am constantly working into the cave work and what we're doing, which then relates to the mangroves and the sharks in a secondary way. But it's been since March 15th since I've seen the sharks. When I am with the sharks, the original work that I started, it was a tourism job. So when people ask me, oh, I want to do what you do, at the end of the day, if I want to simplify my descriptions, never mind the titles I have and, you know, everything I do, and I could sit here and just give you all the titles of all the things I teach and all that. I am a diving professional who works in shark tourism, which is a very, very wealthy industry in the Bahamas. The Bahamian government, they did a couple of very good things back in 1993, forbid long lining and then scoop net as well as drift nets. So there's quite a lot of very invasive fishing methods that were stopped early. Thanks also to the contribution of Dr. Samuel Gruber from Bimini Shark Lab. Here comes the science. But our shark population was very much left untouched. And the other reason why is, luckily, sharks were not on the fishing nor feeding menu of the local population, nor the export in the proximities, which our market for fishing is primarily the United States of America and Canada. What happens with that is our shark population maintained a nice, healthy level, and then shark tourism developed in all its form, from snorkeling with nurse sharks to glass bottom boats to hand feeding like I do. And in 2015, there was a study done, and it was a citizen science done. It was all done on dive operators, divers, all sorts of questionnaires asking why you're here, what brought you here, and all that. And it was discovered that there's an average of $109 billion million dollars brought into the Bahamas by shark tourism alone. So it's quite a lot of money. So based on that, and what I was doing, and the fact that I wanted to protect sharks, I use simply my work, the shark tourism part, to start a campaign asking and say, hey, we need to protect these animals. I wanted to protect them because I love sharks. And because I find sharks, I can see where the sharks are, and I can see how healthy the ocean is. And Hannah can tell you this, you immerse where the sharks are swimming, no matter where it is, east of Grand Bahama, west of Grand Bahama, Bimini, Cat Island, where there are sharks, with their healthy populations of sharks, the reef is booming at all levels, all the way from all the fish, all the way down to the corals and the sponges and the invertebrates. So for me, it was like a personal love. I wanted to protect sharks. But making people want to protect sharks just to protect sharks sometimes becomes a little bit harder. So one of the leverage that we had here as a community was, well, they actually bring in money. Live sharks have more economical value than dead sharks, and we had to prove that. And so we proved that. And so that's how the work went. Then personally, one of the other jobs I do is introducing people to the sharks. Through the shark dive, through the one-on-one course. People can even wear the chainmail and stand side by side with me and do what I call shark themselves, enter in a communication and contact with shark that from a scientific point of view maybe has no value, but from an emotional contact point of view has one of the most beautiful values I've ever seen in my life. People come up with a total concept of sharks being creatures with feelings, with desires, with fears, with also being vulnerable. They see down there my sharks being, hurt or being damaged. And so mine is a people approach. And from a scientific point of view, what Hannah was talking about is I do what it's called dive site fidelity. So that's the reason why I never moved. I picked an area and I concentrate on this area, and by going in on a daily basis, both in the caves and with the sharks and on the reef, I can actually see changes. I can tell you which coral head was sick and died within the last 2 to 3 weeks. I can tell you how many years as this mollusks been on this reef. I have an anemone that I've been waving at for the last 16 years. So I have a collection of data that is caused by this dive site fidelity, so this repetition.
And that's something that I think is like, I can feel myself, like every time you talk about it, like I get flushed, because as scientists, we're like, long-term data sets are usually what are used to prove trends and changes, and you can attribute it to something good or bad happening. So in your case, a lot of your dive site, you can say you've seen healthy reefs, you know, from the invertebrates to the fish, and that's something that's like a positive thing. So we can attribute that to all of the different factors that are going on. So a lot of the times, unfortunately, it's to monitor bad things. So here in Florida, we've seen a lot of coral reef decline. And again, that's been based on diver observations. But to get your hand, what I think the scramble is now for conservation biologists is to get our hands on what was known 10, 20 years ago. And that's where the value of someone who observes this as a naturalist, for lack of a better term, but somebody who has standardized their observation. So like you said, your dive site, your site fidelity has been very, very consistent over time. And all of these are just little bells going, going off for a scientist, because these are the things that are super important to monitoring that stuff, moving forward and seeing the trends. And where that science comes in, then your observations can be turned a little bit into science. And then all of that can get wrapped up and handed to a policymaker to say, look, this is what we've observed. So conservation doesn't happen in a bubble. So that's why we get excited when we hear about these long-term observations. So I did have a question. So you're at the same place all the time, and do you see the same species of sharks? Because I know we've talked about it before, where if you think about, if you guys have heard of other sites like Tiger Beach, etc., there's usually pretty big sharks of very different species. I mean, do you only really see one or two different species? What's your species composition, I guess?
So the species composition where I work, which is less than a mile off the south shore of Grand Bahama on a shallow reef, it's a 45-foot, 15 meters depth, is primarily the Caribbean reef sharks and the nurse sharks. So those are constantly bred. Sometimes we see a couple of the sharp nose. They're a little bit difficult to recognize just because they look very similar to the Caribbean reef sharks, but we have had sharp nose. On occasion, we have been having great hammerheads and the tigers scooping by, but those are the exception to the rule. So if primarily I work with Caribbean reef sharks and nurse sharks. Now, what they do, the population that I deal with stretches over about a 2-mile radius. They might stretch further. What I'm saying is I dive within a 2 miles radius and I see the population within that 2-mile radius. But usually Caribbean reef sharks are not migratory animals and they're stationary. So I actually have an advantage to other species is I can work with these sharks year round. Where Tiger Beach and the great hammerheads and the oceanic white tips here in the Bahamas have only a seasonal presence, which makes dive site fidelity a little bit more difficult. And within the Caribbean reef sharks, I have a population that tends to sit within the area where I do the dive. And then there is a branch of the population that actually doesn't even come in. And they can be less than 200-300 yards away on a different dive site, but I don't see them coming into the dive. Well, when I see them or don't see them, is because I physically know each and every one of the sharks. We have a collection of the entire picture of the shark with the details of the dorsal fin, the pectoral fins, the tail, some of the blemishes that hopefully stay. Shark skin has this crazy tendency of like healing so perfectly. Sometimes you see a blemish and you're thinking, oh, that's going to stay. That's really deep. And 6 months later, there's like nothing. But we have a catalog of each animal and each shark from that point of view. We also have a collection of what is called photogrammetry. Photogrammetry, it's done with a little camera, a little GoPro, and 2 laser beams. And you take a video with this little homemade, you have it, I have it here too. There it is.
Okay, we have one.
You go around and basically take a video of the shark with a camera in the middle and the two laser, and then with a little chart at home, you can actually measure based on the 25 centimeters distance between the two program lasers. So we have like this huge catalogation of the sharks, which I use for other people. Personally, I've spent so much time in the water with them that I see them visually. I can actually recognize some of my sharks from how they swim. The same you would recognize someone's walking in a crowd. I can actually physically recognize how they swim from a different distance. I haven't even seen yet any of the characteristics, and I know that's, you know, could be Stumpy or Grandma. And so we have these two different populations. One comes and interacts with the humans. The other one kind of like stays off. What I've noticed, the one that stays off tends to come in into the interaction, and maybe Hannah had questions later, but I'll bring it in, when I remove hooks. So what I noticed is these sharks that don't come and interact, when they're damaged with hooks, they actually come into the dive site and tend to come into the interaction when they only present hooks and then disappear again.
So they're not part of your regular crew.
The advantage that I have to have in this relationship with Hannah and science is I may see something because I'm there day in, day out. And maybe there is a paper out there somewhere, somehow, but sometimes I don't know. But I give you an example. Do you remember 2 summers ago, I noticed basically through a diary that I keep, I know which shark has had mating season through the bite marks that their bodies present. So they get pretty big gashes and a lot of bruises and kind of like, it looks violent, but that's how sharks mate. And so I know those are females had a mating encounter. And then obviously by this time of year, I can tell when the sharks are pregnant. They do present a traditional round up belly that extend from after the gills, after the pectoral fins, all the way down to the tail. So you can really start seeing their belly rounding up. So I write down, oh, Grandma this year is pregnant. Oh, Grandma last year did mate. And I remember there was one season, we verified the Caribbean reef sharks, they either mate or give birth. So if in July of this summer, Steph, who is now pregnant, will give birth, she will not produce any of the pheromones to attract the males, or so we thought, right? They usually don't mate. But then I had a couple of females through the years that actually were pregnant, gave birth a couple of weeks ahead of what is the schedule, and then 2 weeks later showed up with bite marks typical of the mating, but they never became pregnant. So this is a kind of information, and then I'll be all excited and text Hannah, and then Hannah with her science background can either find that this is already being verified or actually decide that this is something that we can actually look into and try to study.
Yeah, and those are definitely I think we've, especially with sharks, look, there's a lot of work to be done, 500 plus species, and we know very little about the life history of a lot of those species, and of the ones that we do know, it's based on, you know, kind of patchy information. There hasn't been a huge, the lemon shark is one of the best studied sharks. The Bimini Shark Lab, like you said, Dr. Gruber and his whole amazing crew have really like gotten into the fine details, but that's one lab working with one species. You really don't find that fine scale kind of understanding. And again, it's based on observations of somebody who's able to be in the water, and it's obviously really valuable. So that's been really interesting to hear the comments, and we work with divers here in Florida as well, as they know, you know, as they make observations, we've seen changes in skin pattern and colors and you know, different mating seasons that are different than the published information. So science isn't like, okay, we write the paper, we know what we're talking about, every Caribbean reef shark gets pregnant in July. It's about always asking and verifying and asking again. So again, that's why these relationships are really important. So you had mentioned that you haven't been in the water since sometime in March. Has that ever happened before? Have there been long stretches when you haven't been able to get back in the water?
Oh yes, they're called hurricanes. Or
I figured.
The worst stretch has been now after Dorian. I went in the water 3 weeks after Dorian just to do a dive. Visibility maybe was 20 feet at the time. I mean, the suspended particles were pretty much atrocious. You still have to think we were still an island without running water and power. So it was actually pretty good to be able to motor up a boat and head out into the ocean and have a visit. And the sharks were there. I saw about 6 or 7 of them, but then it took about 2.5 months to be able to go back and actually establish again, say, hey, you know, here I am, I'm back. And this has happened after Hurricane Matthew, as well as Hurricane Francis and Jeannie back in 2004. Now I'm really dating myself. And then after Sandy in 2012. So any major storm that's hit the island has elongated the stretch of the time I spent in the water. Same as I remember, you know, once I went around for a month backpacking through India. So I was a month out of the water with the sharks. But at the time, there might be other feeders doing the work. So like complete absence of humans has been, it says my connection is a little bit unstable. I hope everybody can still hear me. My complete absence usually after major storms and now after COVID. What we've noticed is that the sharks go on with their day-to-day life. They don't seem to be affected in any shape or form. None of them look like emancipated. None of them was missing. None of them was damaged by any of these hurricanes through the years. There are thoughts that during the storms, the sharks tend to go deeper. One of the observations I've done, and Hannah asked me earlier on, so how much time I spend in the water with sharks? If I am in a day dedicated to the sharks, I can be in the water about 4 to 5 hours, depending on the day. And although it sounds quite a lot, it's actually less than what each and every one of us might spend in an office in a day or talking to their colleagues. But from a being in a water point of view, is quite a lot of time. But one of the things I noticed is, for example, when the hurricanes come, is the sharks, the Caribbean sharks, the one I'm working with, tend to become a little bit edgy. And about 3 to 4 days prior to the storm having to hit the island, because obviously it's very well forecasted, the sharks go into this provisioning mode. So they seem to be very much affected by weather patterns, and especially with the hurricane, their intensity of wanting to provision escalates to the point that I've come up with the rules. If there is a hurricane heading for this island 4 to 5 days prior to the hurricane, there's no more food interaction work with the sharks.
Really? That's it. And so are they just like hyped up? Is there
they look like people going buying toilet paper for COVID-19.
That's the worst.
So they have that kind of like frantic behavior, high energy intensity, which according to the rules that I follow for me to work with sharks, obviously for the safety of the people and the sharks themselves, we interrupt any of these direct food-related interactions. We might still go scuba diving, but usually about 3 to 4 days before the hurricane is prep anytime anyway. You know that you're in Florida. So, but it's become very much like something that I notice, and they go into provisioning mode. It seems like they feel. I try to imagine these animals with 8 senses, right? Feeling this barometric pressure declining. We feel it outside. The difference in the air we breathe and how the birds get quiet and how our blood pressure changes as the hurricane comes close and siphons all the weather away and just puts up this cape. I try to imagine these animals with 8 senses being affected by the pressure of the water as well. So very much another observation that I collected through the years that makes me come up with certain rules about interacting with the animals.
That's, I mean, based on safety, that seems like a really good call. And then after a hurricane, so you get back in the water, does it take a while for them to come in a little closer? Do you think they've like moved off the area a little bit and want to, or do you think is it kind of just business as normal?
They stay, primarily they stay. I never had to wait. And they come in as if nothing has happened, especially the older ones, the older ladies, the one that have been working for 10, 12 years. They usually come back in a certain way, almost like imagine them tapping their fins and saying, where have you been? What I noticed is they are not affected by our absence, which for me is a fundamental, that they're not affected by our absence. And one of the reasons why these Caribbean reef sharks are, although they are listed as apex predators by the scientists, it's an apex predator slash cleaner. So they're usually a shark that will show up with dead, dying, decaying kind of fish. It is the shark, one of the most pestiferous sharks to have if you were to be a spear fisherman. You can swim around with a spear for however long you want, and there's no sharks ever. And the moment you hit the spear, they're just right there. So they've been following you all along. Is one of the ones that causes, you know, the most troubles for spear fishermen. Chances are, if there's a Caribbean reef shark in the area, the fish will not make it intact up to the surface. So it is primarily a cleaner, although it is an apex hunter. So.
Yeah, so I think the term apex is probably not what a lot of people think. It doesn't, you know, always mean that it's at the very top and that's all it does. So I think that's another thing that, like, with our like education and outreach and talking about the science is kind of explaining that, because I think a lot of people are usually really shocked to hear that, you know, great whites are apex, but obviously they do have predators. If you guys are following anything in South Africa, there's a pair of killer whales down there that are causing a little bit of trouble, but also that smaller sharks are prey for larger sharks. So it's, or young sharks are prey for older sharks. So it is one of those like kind of key words that don't always mean exactly what people think it means. So you had mentioned too your ladies. So do you see a difference between male and female in the presence around your dive site?
Yes, they tend to be primarily females. From what I've observed, also the females tend to be bigger in size and tend to grow bigger than the males. Mm-hmm. Where the nurse sharks, for example, I have primarily males. So the Caribbean reef sharks are primarily females, and the nurse sharks I have primarily males. I have 2 females and 4 males nurse sharks, where I have 2 to 3 males, and then the rest, about 20 to 22 females, for Caribbean reef sharks. Their size also dictates their hierarchy. That is undisputed. The bigger girls will come in and the rest of the sharks will kind of like part a little bit away. I also watch some of the bigger girls like Stumpy or Grandma discipline some of the sharks. So they'll come through and give it like a little, they're not going to bite it, but they'll just snap their jaws and turn their head and make the little, 4 or 5 footer shark kind of like scuttle away. It's kind of like, not your place. It's a little bit of a let's say, quote unquote, bully. I really don't like to give human connotations to sharks, but you can really tell it's like, no, this is, I'm coming in, you move. When you grow up, then maybe you can come in the same way that I'm coming in. So there's definitely a hierarchy as well. One of the things I notice is with the males is they tend to be males that have problems. So I never had a full healthy male like the females are showing up on the dive. My males that have showed up had like severe bodily injuries, primarily caused by human interaction. Scrunchy is one of them. He had a giant hole in the head caused by a fisherman gaff. Mad Eye had like a object intrusion inside his throat, and some of the males that are showing up now, they usually present hooks. And it's really interesting. It seems also that the females tend to welcome them only in that kind of situation. Once they're in, then the male stays. Some of them stay. But otherwise, I never had like a fully healthy male just showing up.
So with those injuries and stuff, I'm sure you've been able to see their recovery rate too. I mean, I know that's definitely been like, it's been reported in the science over time, but I'm sure you've seen quite a few injuries recover pretty quick and see what that rate is.
Some are pretty impressive. Some, unfortunately, they also didn't recover. And I think this is one of the things people need to hear, that sharks are not, like invincible. They actually do not recover sometimes from some of the injuries, especially that as humans we inflict on them. The most amazing ones are the injuries caused, for example, by small things, small objects. That could be a hook or a wire. I had Grandma with a wire that was coming out through her gill slits, and the hook was invisible. And I knew the hook was somewhere lingering inside the gill slits. And obviously I can't just pull the wire because I'm afraid the gill slit, the hook is going to get stuck in her gill slit. And this wire was rubbing on her side. And so from behind her gill all the way almost to her abdomen, she had a persistent infection. When you see it down there, and that is one of the problems, it looks green. But when you take a picture with a color camera that brings the color, her entire side was scraped raw. And it was this wire that kept rubbing against her side. And it went on for 2 or 3 months. And we were really worried because an infection like that can enter within the blood system of the animal. So finally, one day she was relaxed in my lap and the hook had moved enough and I was able to remove it. Her skin healed within less than 2 weeks. Completely gone. Same as the mating season bite marks. They have bite marks as deep as my fingers. Right inside. If you and I had those kind of bite marks, we will be in the ICU.
Right.
And these sharks swim around and then they heal. So anything that is something natural like that, they're okay. The one that they don't recover from are primarily, some of the worst ones is unfortunately propeller cut. So if they lose a vital part of their tail or something like that, I've seen a couple actually not recovering, but in general, their recovery rate is really, really high. The best one that I have is a story, which is the most recent. It was the shark that had a wire wrapped around her dorsal fin. So the entire dorsal fin was wrapped and this part of the dorsal fin was cut. So it was like dangling like this. And so an instructor and myself, Jen and I, cut the wire and then the dorsal fin stayed like this with these little things basically flopping in the water. And we were afraid that it would continue to break here at the bottom of the dorsal fin. But right before we actually left, what we actually realized is that the fin had healed here and left this as an appendix, as a dead appendix. And it was basically melting away as the fin itself had healed. And it was just a little appendix. I expect to go back and have this appendix fallen off. So instead of the injury continuing along the dorsal fin, it actually self-healed.
There's that when I worked in South Africa, there was a great white that they think the propeller hit the dorsal fin. So as the dorsal fin would be, the shark swimming that way, it basically sliced it into about 4 pieces, almost right down to the base. And within a couple of months, they just started to see little healing spots right at the base and just started to heal together. And several years later, they had a picture of the same shark where you could see it was lighter skin. But it had healed basically the entire dorsal fin. But you do make a good point that they're not invincible for sure. Have you, I'm sure over the time you've been there, but have you noticed that you have lost some sharks?
So, and that is one of the issues, one of the heartbreaking part of my job is I don't have any closure. So Foggy Eye was one of my favorite. And Foggy Eye was a big girl. She was 2 meters 10. She was over to 8 feet, and a fairly big one. Like her width, her plumpness was really, really nice. And then one day she developed a broccoli, kind of like a growth underneath the base of a dorsal fin. So if this is dorsal fin, this is her head right here. She had a little tiny little broccoli. When I touched her, when I poked it, it felt a little bit hard to the touch. And then this broccoli grew to the size almost of like my fist within 1 year. And she lost almost half her weight. And then slowly started going up her dorsal fin. And no matter how much I fed her, she never recovered her weight. And excuse me. She's been gone now 1.5 years. And I think she died or she perished under cancer. And then we had another one. Her name was Isosceles. I call it Isosceles because her chin was a little bit, instead of being nice and flat, she had a little bit of a triangle shape under her chin. So like the triangle Isosceles. And unfortunately, propeller cut the bottom lobe of her tail. So Caribbean reef sharks have a very nice developed bottom and upper lobe, and the bottom lobe disappeared. And she showed up on the dive few times, but then she is gone as well. And she used to be a repetitive shark. So definitely some of these animals do disappear. Like I said, unfortunately, I don't have any closure, but for an animal that's been there 10 years to disappear after start showing this kind of weaknesses, I can only assume they perished.
Well, and there's, I mean, observation and using some of the tools that we have as scientists as well. One of the really most used ones now are tagging with satellite tags or acoustic tags, which are little tags that basically have an individual frequency for each shark. Each tag gets attached to one shark, so that shark has its own little tune. And then there are listening stations all up and down the East Coast and all throughout the Bahamas as well. And that's a hard thing for us as well. So we've caught and tagged a bunch of sharks. We've measured them. We've taken a ton of data. We've collected everything we can, and we send them on their way. And if you get those receivers back, those listening stations back, and you don't hear from this particular shark, it's a really big question mark. We obviously don't spend as much time with each individual as you do, but it is still that sort of open-ended, or if it pings in North Carolina and then maybe in the Bahamas and then you don't hear from it again, like it's hard to find out and kind of come to terms with what that shark story was. So it's very similar, although like I said, we don't spend quite as much time with each individual. But it kind of as well to me speaks to the fact that like we still know there's still big gaps in what we know about these sharks' lives for sure. So as we're talking, I've seen some really great questions crop up. If you're okay with me hitting some of those for now, we've got regarding the removal of hooks from sharks. How do you think the newer sharks knew to make their way to you for help? Do you think that was something that they, is there some communication amongst the sharks? Like, how did they figure out, like, maybe I can get some help over here?
That is a question that we don't have an answer, and is I think one of the most fascinating part about sharks is that that connections that we can also make as humans to them is when I start removing hooks from my sharks. So about the hooks, I don't remove hooks from all the sharks in the world. I don't go around trying to remove hooks from sharks I don't know. Primarily, I tend to remove hooks from my sharks and the sharks that show up on the dive. So I may have removed 5 or 6 hooks from the same shark. But what happens is on the dive, I specifically start addressing removing hooks. And when I say addressing is I change the way I interact with the animals. In order to remove hooks, and I know a lot of people ask me to come here and help me remove hooks, is a totally different game. I have to excite the animals. I have to put them in a different mind state. It becomes sometimes a brace for impact kind of behavior. And I really have to go in. I know people that send me all sorts of pliers when I basically go in. It's the hands. This is what I use to remove hooks. That's the only thing, the only tool. So removing a hook is not just, oh, I'm going to put the shark and I'm going to gently pull. It's very much a different interactive level. So when I hyped up the interactive level to then remove the hooks, as I start removing hooks, then new sharks start appearing in the outer skirts of what is the interactive place. And they might not come in on that first dive, but if I go down the next day and I start removing hooks again, they might show up again. And then it starts, I call it the dance, right? I have to start convincing them to come in and to trust this giant thing blowing all these bubbles, emitting all these weird noises and vibrations that obviously were scary to them, and need to trust me, need to trust the concept that the fish that I'm handing out will not hurt like the last one that they actually ate, because I'm pretty sure they have a connection between the two. And then comes the trying to remove the hook. The shark swims away because it hurts, then it comes back. The amazing part is they keep coming back. They just allow me to work. So yes, they do have somehow a communication. Can I prove it? No, absolutely not. But can I show it by saying, this is what happens every time? That's the way.
And listening to you talk about it too, my brain kind of goes just off the cuff, but you talk about hormones. So a lot of communication in fish happens with hormones. So if there's a stress hormone being released into the water, their muscle twitch is different. That vibration gets sent out into the water. I think there's a lot of communication, and I think we think like, oh, they pick up the phone and say like, hey, this chick's really nice. But there's a lot of communication that goes on. And when there's a relief, we see it here in Florida. the sharks that get the hooks removed, often when it's done correctly and doesn't traumatize the shark is actually even more relaxed and stays around in the area. So these signals are being sent out. So it's definitely something, you know, to have to get really creative. But it's something that, like, hearing you talk about it, you know, we can start to look at eDNA and lots of the tools that we have on hand to kind of start to answer that. And, like, you know, if we put some listening stations that are a little bit further out of line of sight, maybe we can tell if sharks or that particular shark is coming a little bit closer, but we can't see it, and assessing the situation. So there's a lot of work we can do on that. So hopefully we'll get to an answer at some point. Another question, having not seen the shark since the 15th. I think we kind of answered that. They kind of, it's business as usual, as you mentioned. Yeah.
Yes, I'm not worried about them. The sharks are fine. I have years of proof that when our absence does not affect them physically or, you know, from a growth point of view. I'm actually looking forward to seeing a little bit the oceans. So some of the industry of the Bahamas is export of fishing, but also by having a lot of tourism, which we love, there's always a lot of pressure also on the fishing industry to serve all the restaurants. So honestly, I'm actually looking forward to seeing the environment be a little bit taking a breather, because what the Bahamians are fishing for their own sustainability will not really put a dent much into the fish. So after Dorian, when we went back in, there was like very much a growth into the environment. So sharks and the fish actually are doing okay. I'm not worried about them. They're fine. Chances are they will have less hooks too.
Right. Well, that's definitely a good point. So Jill is asking, you have extraordinary hook removing capabilities. She's wondering if you see any seasonal trends in the number of hooks or size of hooks used. Do you think the hooks are from people like intentionally fishing for sharks, or maybe it's just a shark got it by accident? Do you see seasonal, or?
I'll answer with my hooks. How about that?
Okay. We like visual aids. That's good.
Well, it makes it easier, right? So these are some of the hooks I've been removing. Obviously, I've been giving it away through the years. So, and I'm going to pick them up and show them. So if I look into a hook this size, right, this is a hook for a big game fish. It could be either for the sharks. Now, the sharks are protected, so you're not supposed to fish for sharks. But as many of you know, there's a huge difference between the law and the enforcement of the law. But hopefully people are out there trying to fish like big animals, let's say a tuna, a marlin, or, you know, sailfish or something like that. So when they see this hooks, it makes me wonder, was it that specifically for the shark, or did they come too close to the area where the sharks are? The one that makes me know that it's unintentional are this kind of hooks. This size hooks is obviously not designed for a shark. It doesn't mean they don't create problems. So some of them have had problems with, again, they're not for the sharks, but one of the issues they have is maybe they become, this is a three-way hook. And so this goes into the shark's mouth, and then this gets stuck into the shark gill slit, for example, and starts severing the gill slit. I had one that actually was, the shark was small enough where this was in the mouth and this was on the, almost attached to the dorsal fin. So the shark was like swimming like this, and it was just kind of like, could not move. So the first thing I tried to do is remove it off the fin so that at least it can just swim around with this. But obviously every time it moved, it kind of like tangled. And then there's the one that are not for the sharks, but they're extremely bad for the sharks, and are these ones. And the reason why is the hook in itself is attached to the mouth, but then they have this, a 2-pound, you can't really tell the weight from this, but like, this is solid. This is like nearly 3-pound thing. So now that they have it, I would like to invite anyone to try to have a piercing and then hang a 3 pounds weight off their piercing and see where their ears, nose, or side of the mouth go. And so maybe it's not directly to the shark, but because of how they're designed, what it does is start dragging either through the mouth, opening. If it's attached somewhere else, it start opening like gashes through the body. So there's all sorts of hooks. The worst ones are from a removal point of view, and I had fishermen attacking me saying, oh, you know, you can't. This is from a removal point of view. It's a circular hook. The circular hook is different. This is called the J hook, and this is a circular hook. You would think I'm a fisherman. But the circular hook, the problem goes inside the shark's mouth and then stays out. And then trying to remove this to circulate out is really, really hard. And one of the reasons is the scientifically proven, obviously, the toughness of the skin of sharks, especially females. They have a tougher skin than the males. When this little barb here remains stuck into their skin, is like trying to remove nail from, I think, like, you know, wood without anything, just with your bare hands. And so some of it is like quite a lot of work. So hopefully this answers your questions. Technically they should not be targeted, but there's all sorts of different hooks, and I try to remove as many as I can, no matter if you're big or small.
Yeah. And just a note about the circle hooks, and I'm not arguing or anything, but I'm just saying the point of the circle hook is so that it catches on the side, because the J hooks can be swallowed and gut hook a shark. So that is the argument for circle hooks. But I can imagine with that extra curve, I work with fishermen, I work with anglers, and trying to see them get that out is, I completely understand. It's nearly impossible. So thank you for giving it a try. Let's see, we've got another question. Oh, I'll take this one if that's okay. The viable options for remotely monitoring shark behavior. I kind of touched on this, the tagging that we can do. So we attach satellite tags to hammerheads to determine what kind of depth they use over time. Once they're released from being caught, we use the acoustic tags. So we can 10-year tags that give off a little specific ping, and we can let that animal go, and all of the receivers can pick up their movements. Lots of people are using animal-borne cameras now, cameras you can clip onto the fin. That's really non-invasive, which is really nice. So there's a lot of different ways. Unfortunately, most of this technology costs a ton of money. So it's very slowly starting to get to be more mainstream. But because these are huge animals that cover, like Cristina said, some species can cover thousands of miles. It's kind of necessary to track them that way. So those are some of the technologies that we have available to us now, which has given us really good insights into where some of these animals go. So let's see, why do you think the fully healthy males may stay away? Maybe it's to do with the size hierarchy that you mentioned?
I would say so. I don't know. It's just something that I've been observing. So when I see the interaction between males and females have the higher position. The bigger females have a higher position over the smaller females, and definitely the females have a higher position over the males. I actually seen younger females even disciplining the small males. So it takes quite a lot of guts. I don't know, again, like Hannah said, they might have, when they're injured, a different hormonal reactions, and so that may make them be perceived less intrusive, maybe more welcoming to the group, something that the group does not feel as if it's a different dominant coming in. They tend to stay separated unless it's mating season anyway. So males and females, it's not that they cruise around the reef together when they're not into mating season.
Yeah.
They're also not monogamous creatures, so it's like very much an instinctual kind of work that sharks do. So there's no like male and female communications like we have in some other species where they're couples for life sometimes.
Yeah, and I would say there's some good videos done by scientists of sharks mating, but it's quite traumatic to watch. If you have to actually go onto YouTube and see shark mating, it's a whole other, it's quite disturbing. But it's natural, so that's good. Really good question from Isabel. How do you energetically or mentally prepare before interacting with the sharks? Like, what goes through your head maybe on the back of the boat? Or is it just muscle memory at this point?
Well, No, no, it's not. It's never. It can never be just muscle memory. That applies to my cave diving, like my rebreather or anything like that. Obviously, muscle memory makes it a little bit easier for me to do 10 things, but also I prepare myself. So I can prepare my student and I can watch what's happening on the boat and I can make sure everything is okay while I also prepare myself. But the primary part is I make sure that everything is in place. If I wrote a full shark dive, development, so who does what, where, how, when, what if, for each and every one of the participant on the dive. And I deal with trained people, or I train people to make sure that we're all on the same page. So when that in place, make sure that all the tools are on board, including a trauma kit. There's a specifically trauma kit that I had Dan making for specifically shark dives and all of that. I have that first preparation. So what are my tools? Are my tools ready? And they're all lined up. So I always line up everything. I make sure that none of these things that I may forget may increase my stress level. So prepared. I then methodically prepare. So take like the time. By now, yes, it is muscle memory. I can put on something. It's one of the things that everyone laughs about within minutes. I had some of my new trainees that waited for me. You know, I was walking around in my shorts and t-shirt and I said, oh, you want to start getting ready? And she kind of like waited for me to start becoming ready. I finished, 15 minutes before her, just because I've done this so many times over.
I've
really, I take a moment to take a breath. Was that?
I said I've definitely witnessed it. It's quite impressive to see you put on chainmail, tape between your fingers, all in the time it takes me to get my wetsuit on. So it's impressive, and I can do.
So when everything physical is ready, I take few minutes to settle mentally, and again through like my checklist, is my regulator working and all of that. Once I hit the water, then the thing that kicks in is I'm just happy to be there and happy to see the sharks. But the first thing I do is I watch how the sharks react when I hit the water. Are they swimming towards me? Are they scattering away? Are they staying on the surface? And that gives me a lot of information and data on what happened prior to me being there. I know the weather affects them, the visibility affects them. So once I hit the water, as I'm swimming towards the side, I'm watching the animals and what they're doing. And within seconds of landing, I can just tell from my first approach how the dive is going to be. And then I adapt to them. And is one of the things that is very important when we work with sharks is we need to understand they might have a good day or a bad day. The environment may affect them. Someone has been out there before as affecting them in a way that we may not perceive, what happened, but we can see like in the reactions. And so we adapt to them in our interaction, and we either spike it up or tone it down or relax. And one of the things I use as a mantra when I teach is you have to be able to control the food in order to control the sharks. So you can use the food to attract the sharks, but you also have to be able to say, not right now. Food is done, come down a little bit. Once they come down a little bit, then we resume with the interaction and all of that. So.
Yeah, and I've been in the water with a lot of different people doing a lot of different things with sharks, and they're, I know that you and I, that's for another time, but a lot of different, and you and I can laugh and we can have our friends on the boat and be joking, but once it comes down to it, there's, I think some of the best divers and the best people who interact with sharks, there's just a kind of a calm confidence that it emanates, and I think that's definitely picked up by the sharks. Like even from a biological level, again, thinking of it scientifically, your heart rate's down, you're not giving off stress and fear hormones. I mean, these are all like really little details, but still it builds a bigger picture of like you're in control of the situation, and those are all kind of qualities I think makes it really, really successful. I have one more question. We're getting towards the end of the time. I do see we have a bunch of questions in here, and I will put them to Cristina for sure. And maybe we can wrap it up with a post a little bit later. So I'm sorry if I didn't get to your question.
If you want to extend a little bit, if people are okay, I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I mean, if everybody, we still got 40 plus people on here. So if we want to keep going, we certainly can. This is a good question. I'd love to hear the answer to this too, is do you ever free dive with the sharks? And if so, do you notice there's a difference in how the sharks interact or behave towards you? Have you seen any differences between scuba and free diving?
Absolutely. It's one of the best ones that I actually have, opposite to many other people interacting with sharks. So my sharks, my group is so used to the scuba diving physical interaction that when I free dive with them, they actually run away. So if I am dressed in my wetsuit belt and free diving fins and I go free diving with them, especially as long as I'm gliding down, the moment I'm gliding down, I can see, you know, my shark, and as soon as she feels me, she's like, hey, and I think I'm going to just scoot out of here. Now, once I'm down there and I settle and I start swimming, then the sharks come back in and I'm part of the group. But as I'm gliding down without the scuba, I notice that they tend to run away. And here's my explanation. I am only 5'5", but my fins are 3.5 feet. So now I'm at 8.5 to 9 feet long, silent animal. So I'm not distinguished myself by blowing the bubbles, which they're used to. Oh, Cristina, blow bubbles. I mean, it's a giant blowing bubble thing, right? And all of a sudden I'm gliding in towards them, which in any animal kingdom, it is a confrontational behavior, right? I was like, I'm bigger than you. I'm coming towards you. So what the sharks do is actually scoot away. And I can see it, you know, their tails just flickers a little bit more. And they get out of my free diving range. When then I settle down at 45 feet, 50 meters, then they come back in. And they're like, oh, okay, it's you. No problem. But yes, I free dive with them, and we scuba dive with them without chainmail when we don't bring food. We don't need the chainmail. And the people that come and watch us, even when we're feeding 2 feet away from them, don't wear the chainmail.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So we've got one more question here at the bottom. Are there water sampling measures being taken, or where your population or where your dive site is? Is there any other like samples being taken for environmental stuff at the moment?
Not in the ocean. Right now I'm taking water samples out of the caves to monitor the salinity and what has been changing since Dorian. Unfortunately, is one of those, I wish I'd been taking samples before Dorian, but it is human nature to only study certain things either when we need them or when they become a pest. And in this case, the island of Grand Bahama was flooded, and 70% of the island was underwater, and about 30 feet of water in certain areas have flooded over the island. And a lot of the island is made of limestone, so the salt water went through the limestone and settled through the fresh water to sit on top of the salt water. And right now at home, we still have salt water. So just to give you an idea of the measuring, it's called ppm, it's supposed to be under 500 for you to be able to drink your water. After the hurricane, it was over 4,500. We're now between 1,700 and 2,000 depending on the day. So what I've been doing is collecting samples in the cavern in a freshwater lens and monitor that area, because that's where the intake is. And it seems to be about 300 ppm better than what comes out of the tap, which I assume has to do with transfer and all of that. But no, not out in the ocean.
Another thing to add to our list. So another quick question, we have the question of how do you handle it when and if you see a shark becoming aggressive or in any kind of aggressive behavior when you're down there diving?
So aggressive, I don't think the sharks become aggressive. I call them, they become a little bit more intense. So they come in with like force, they just come in too fast. Maybe there's techniques that we use in order to provision them. And so when they do that is I do the simple thing is basically I shut down the stimuli, and the stimuli is the food. So as soon as the sharks are hyped up or there's a different dynamics that goes on, the food is the first thing that we shut down. Once you shut down the food, you just relax. Most of the time I just stand there. And the more I stand there, the more I do nothing, the calmer they become. So it's what Hannah was saying is my output is actually what they are going to receive from me. Point in case is when people come on a shark dive, for example, there's some people that now use these LED new video lights. All I need is 2 or 3 people to have those video lights on for the energy of the sharks to be about 10 points higher. And during a shark dive, I can just look at the videographer and going, oh, this is not good. And I tell the people, you know, shut your light off. And the energy of the sharks just goes like 10 steps down. So that's how I deal with them. Some of them I discipline. I am, you know, like if they come up too high, I'll just basically push them down and push them out of the way. And if they come up high again, I push them down and push them out of the way. And when they come in at the right height and the right speed, I reward them. So it's not training because we're in the open ocean, but it's a little bit of conditioning, right? If you come in at this speed and this height, I'll reward you. If you misbehave and are a little bit of a pest, then we are going to have a little bit of distancing.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And then another question is, with no divers in the water at the moment, do you think that sanctuaries are still being protected? There's been some news that marine parks in like Southeast Asia are being plundered with no one being around. And I mean, from the information that I've been given, I mean, throughout the world where we've worked really hard to establish shark sanctuaries and marine protected areas, like you mentioned in the very beginning, enforcing that and policing that can be really, really difficult, and especially in the middle of all of this. And just having a dive operation, like a lot of the liveaboards aren't running. So you know, if someone's coming to poach in an area and they see a gigantic liveaboard with loads of technology on it, they're more likely not to be poaching in that area. So you've got your rangers who may or may not be functioning right now in the marine parks. And then you've got, you know, your dive operations that aren't running, that are also eyes on the water. So yeah. What do you think is going on in the Bahamas?
Well, it is a concern. It always has been a concern. It depends on the area, and I do assume that areas that are closer to monitoring, for example, you know, 3/4 of a mile off the south shore of Grand Bahama, it's harder for someone to come in and poach. There are other areas where there is that risk. It's an unfortunate question that I can't really answer. I'm hoping that with the lockdowns and we have a forbidden for anyone to cross our waters. So hopefully that is being enforced in some of the port of entries. Obviously, it's very hard to manage. We're 470,000 square kilometers, 180,000 square miles between land and ocean. So it's a small nation. We're 350,000 people in the entire nation. So our resources are very limited. I have that fear. I'm afraid, you know, that people may go out there and just fish whatever they need to fish, especially with the economy declining as it is and people having issues, you know, make ends meet. And we all out of work right now. So that I can only hope. Obviously, I'm respecting the rules, so I can't go out there. Maybe I can try to figure it out through the Bahama National Trust if we can go out there every once in a while. But
yeah. I think it's a concern for a lot of people.
It is a very big concern.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And then we did, one of the last questions here is any literature or recommendations for like books on diving, or are there books that have been written about diving with sharks that you can recommend, or maybe websites or any source of information that you would recommend?
There's a few modern books that have come out on diving with sharks. I know Oceans Ramsey published one, and then there's I can't remember his name.
We can post it later.
I can post it later, but there's not really. Here's the problem with those books, and this is my personal opinion, is unfortunately, and I've read quite a few of them, is they summarize the shark encounter and your behavior as how to dive with sharks, how to free dive with sharks, and sharks do this and sharks do that. But the problem is there's a 520 plus species of sharks, and the way I interact and work with a whale shark is not the same way I should interact and work with a great white, nor with a lantern shark, which is the size of a pen. So the downfall of these books, and don't get me wrong, some of them have some good suggestions, is they basically give out this rule: oh, don't do this with the sharks. And it's like, oh, if it's a basking shark, it doesn't really apply. And if it's a Caribbean reef sharks, it doesn't really apply. And it is not true that if you free dive with all the sharks, they'll accept you more than if you're on scuba. And some sharks really love rebreathers, and some of them, by all means, including mine, brace for impact, because when you go down there with a rebreather, they'll hit you and attack you, trying to get you out of their area because you're, you know, an unwelcome giant animal. So if you read them and find them, is you need to also think about, you know, where are you, what are you doing, which shark species. Maybe a better suggestion is to find an operator that works specifically with certain species and go through their guidance in that area. A great white from Guadalupe behaves extremely different from a great white from South Africa just because of the water visibility, temperature, and conditions in which they operate. In South Africa, if you have a good day, it's 20 to 30 foot visibility. In Guadalupe is, you know, on a normal day, it's 100-foot visibility. Their behavior, their swimming, their way you can do things with them, legally or illegally, because some people get out of the cage illegally in Guadalupe, but in a certain way it's safe. You would never do that with great whites in South Africa. So well, I would rather love to find books that are species specific, or at least maybe the carcarinos together, and, you know, some of, you know, the laucas together, or something like that, that helps a little bit more with understanding each and every shark. I don't know, Hannah, what do you think?
No, I agree with that. It's something we battle with because we use a lot of our science our science gets used to defend behaviors sometimes, and it's kind of, I find myself saying, oh, well, that's really species specific or location specific. So there's always a caveat that we have to keep adding to these conversations. So we get caught up in that a lot. And honestly, I encourage people to do a lot of research on operators, because like I've said, this whole talk is the fact that there's this local knowledge and these people have been doing it for a really long time. They're going to be, and I hate to use this word, I know we all kind of cringe, but they're going to be the experts. They're going to be the ones that are going to know that species, that kind of dive. There's a difference when you're sunk down to the bottom than doing a drift dive. There's going to be a difference in the species. There's going to be difference in the seasons. So I think it's a really great opportunity to reach out to the people who are actually doing this on the ground floor, and get information directly from them. And I think that's probably going to be the most accurate information for sure. So, well, actually it's ticking down to 12:15 and all of my batteries are dying. So I'm going to have to go ahead and sign off. I just want to say a huge thank you to everybody for joining us. If you get an opportunity, please check out Cristina's Facebook. Obviously, all her stuff is under Cristina Zenato, and also People of the Water, which is her nonprofit arm, and the American Shark Conservancy. Please check it out. It's a time, I know that everybody's stressed out, but all of the stuff and resources and research we do for free. So if you feel like supporting us, we would really appreciate it. And hopefully you can see that the work we're doing is pretty valuable. So again, thank you everyone. Please stay safe. Thank you so much for joining us. Cristina, did you have a last word?
Yes, this is the last word, because I know a lot of the messages I received is how do I get to work with sharks? And I hope this talk has demonstrated you can work with sharks on 360. What I would like for especially the younger people to understand is not working with sharks, is literally working with sharks on 360. Primarily, you have to have some scuba background sooner or later, unless you're just working specifically with one species. You want to have a scuba background. You want to have a little bit of the technological background. Hannah and I were just discussing how many things we have to do. We have to be photographers, editors, Photoshop artists, Excel, Word. We have to write articles. And there's a lot of time spent behind the scenes that we have to put in order for me to be 4 to 5 hours a day out there on the boat with the sharks. There's the other 8 to 10 hours that I spend at home prior to. I wake up at 4:30 in the morning. I catch up with all the things I have to, believe it or not, I still, someone that has to go grocery shopping, do laundry, walk her pups, clean her apartment, and all of that. So think about growing not only vertically, but trying to also grow exponentially now sideways. And remember, all these different tools will eventually come into place and usefulness in the future. And I hope this talk has inspired you to do so many things that we can do out there.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And that's also why I wanted to do this, because I think people need to see there's always collaborations going on. And you absolutely, if you're passionate about sharks, about conservation, you absolutely don't have to be, I get it all the time. Oh, I can't help, I'm not a biologist. That's
or
not.
live by the ocean. You don't have to live by the ocean to help sharks.
No, we have some of our great volunteers are from Wisconsin and the middle of the country in the United States, et cetera. So yeah, the takeaway I really hope is you guys can see is that you can pretty much have any kind of background, and the passion comes and you're going to learn a lot by just kind of diving straight in. So hopefully that's the takeaway. Again, please give Cristina a good follow, American Shark Conservancy, when you get a chance as well. We really appreciate all the likes and highs and interactions we get to have, especially during this weird time. So I know I'm an open book. Hannah on Facebook, American Shark Conservancy.
Me too. Everything is open.
Yeah, everything's open. We take tons of messages all the time. So we look forward to hearing from you. We're going to go through the chat and make sure that we can have a look at all the questions. Sorry, I know there was a lot going on at the time. So we'll try to review that and get something out, and we'll let you know when the video is posted in case you guys wanted to share it. So
if you have additional questions, just send a private message, preferably email, just because my social media, they pile up and they keep pushing down. So go on my website or People of the Water website and send a message through email. It's easier for me to catch it. I try to answer everyone. Every once in a while I miss someone. So forgive me if I do. I may get back to you 2-3 weeks later going, oh, sorry, I missed your message. But please send message either to Hannah or myself if you have additional questions.
Perfect. All right, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you, Cristina. I miss you.
Thank
Hope everyone's
you.
well.